Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today's video is featuring the new Something Wonderful set from Gina K Designs. This release just went live tonight. We're also going to be using some Whisper amalgam ink, some Canson Monteval watercolor paper, and I am using my Daniel Smith watercolors with a number 2 and a number 8 round brush. My brushes are from the Silver Brush Company, but you can use whatever works for you. So I did a little bit of practice piece here, and I'm going to change the composition just a little bit because I felt like it was just a little smushed. I felt like it just needed to breathe a little bit. So if you are a person who likes to do your own sketches, by all means do that, but I am not, so I like to use stamps. So I want my pomegranate to be kind of front and center in my arrangement, and so I'm stamping that first because this ink, this Whisper amalgam ink, is really great for no line coloring, but because it's not a water-based ink, you kind of do need to pay attention to where you're stamping at. I knew from my practice piece that I was going to have some things that were kind of overlaying each other. And in order to make sure that I couldn't see any of those lines in my finished piece, I did create a little mask. You'll notice at the bottom, I didn't bother cutting out all the particulars because I wasn't going to have anything down that low. So once I have my mask in place, I am going to just continue stamping my leaves and my flowers until I'm happy with my arrangement. I'm going to be honest with you. I thought about doing this as a, like a holiday theme, because, you know, the pomegranate would be super cute with like glittery snow on it and stuff like that. And then I was like, no more holiday right now. So I hope that you view this the way that I view this, which is a nice little break from all of the holiday themes we've been seeing. It's just a pretty watercolor, because that's what it's intended to be. So in this set, there are some florals as well, and I decided to utilize those. I stamped 2 of the larger, more like fluted flower, and then 2 of the smaller flowers with the pomegranate that gives me 5, a nice odd number, which is wonderful for card design. And then I'm just going to fill in the leaves. There are some times where I stamped the leaves just a little further away from each other, knowing that I could just use my paintbrush to kind of connect them and carry them. And so that's what I did. But you can stamp this however works for you. In my first arrangement, I only did 2 flowers and a pomegranate for the odd number of 3. And then, you know, just did 2 bunches of leaves. You can do it however you would like to do it. I would just recommend trying not to overstamp them too much, because, like I said, this ink isn't going to blend out. It's almost like it kind of grabs the watercolor so that you can see the lines, which is great for that no line watercolor look, but can be problematic when you are trying to layer things. So you saw me, I used my number 8 round brush to just reconstitute my dry watercolors, and now we're going to go in and start laying down our base layer. This is just clean water, and I am wetting all the areas of the pomegranate because I'm going to add color to it all at the same time. You don't want the water to be bubbled up on your paper. You just want a sheen of it. So when you look at it from the side, you should see the light reflecting off of it, but it shouldn't be above your paper. And then I'm just going to start picking up pigment and dropping it in. That's what wet on wet means. Your paper is already wet when you're dropping the wet pigment in. And this gives really beautiful results. I mean, it lets the water do the work for you, and kind of moves that pigment and spreads it around. It can be very challenging not to overwork an image. And if you're not happy with it when you put the color down, I would just recommend letting it dry and seeing if you're happier with it once it's dry. Pomegranates they can be more red, more pink. It really depends on, you know, what you're going for. I liked a more pink look, so I will be putting in some pinks and some purples for shading. But the colors that I'm working with are I never can say this word. You guys know this if you watch my videos. Quinacridone. It's something like that. It starts with a Q. Purple and magenta, as well as the yellow. Am I yellow? What is my yellow? I can't remember. It'll be linked below with all the others. And then gold, some teal, and some green. Those are basically the colors that I used. I'm pretty sure my green is sap green. So you don't want to work next to two areas that are wet because the pigment will run into each other. So you can see my pomegranate's a hot mess. It's fine. I'm just going to let it dry, and this is just our first layer. So I'm going to move on to the flowers. With the flowers that are more fluted, there's a single petal that's kind of flipped up. That's the one that I'm working on here. And with these smaller flowers, sometimes I did wet on wet. Sometimes I did more of a dry technique where I went in with the color onto dry paper, and then I would rinse off my brush, blot the base of the bristles. You can see my what is that called? Paper towel off to the left there that I'm using to blot my brush off. And you still want the bristles to have moisture. You just don't want it to have an excess of water. So that's why we blot the base of it instead of the tip. And that just gives us more control. And then I will go in with that damp brush and kind of pull the color out. But I almost always go back with a wet on wet where I drop in more pigment while it is wet. Just because I know watercolors dry back quite a bit, and I like vibrant colors. I'm also very impatient, and so I struggle to let them, like, to go over it layer after layer to build them up. So I try to put down as much pigment as I can, usually the first time around, because I know that I'm going to want that darker, deeper color. If you are a person who is not necessarily into the super vibrant colors, that's totally fine. Or maybe you're a more patient person. So here for the rest of the fluted flowers, I'm going to go back to wet on wet. I'm laying down clean water, and then I'm going to add in some of my yellow, and then some of the gold, and then in the darkest part, I will add in a little bit of permanent brown. And I'm just going to let it kind of do its thing and expand out. For the rest of the flower, I am going to drop in those pinks, purples. I have a color, if you're looking in just the part of my palette that you can see, that top right one, that is a mixture of magenta and yellow, which is giving me a reddish orange. I'm also using that color that I have mixed. And then I'm just letting them mix together and do their thing. I know that I'm going to go over them again with another layer. And in that second layer is where I will be more aware of, like, pulling out my shadows and putting in a little bit of detail work. But for the most part, this wet on wet, I'm just letting it do its thing. And if you're a person who is a big fan of looser watercolors, this may be all you want to do. You may not want to go back in and put in any of that detail, and that's fine. I really thought about just doing a super loose watercolor with this one. But I didn't. I kept it clean. Once I did my practice piece, I was like, ooh, that's pretty. And then I was just kind of committed to keeping it clean from there. Not completely. We're going to do some spatters at the end just because I like them. So, like I said before, you don't want to work in two areas next to each other that are wet because they'll run together and you'll lose any sort of form that you've built. But we're using such a minimal amount of water, especially with these smaller flowers, that they're drying pretty quickly. So the pomegranate in the middle still looks a hot mess. Like, I'm not going to pretend like it's not, but this should encourage you in your own journey of watercolor painting that everybody goes through this stage that looks like a mess. Everybody's painting does, or coloring, or whatever medium you're using. There's always this point in time where it's just like, meh, not great. But it doesn't stay that way. Like, that's where you can't get so discouraged that you don't push through. So now that everything is dry on those flowers that are flipped up, I'm going to go back in and add just a little bit of deeper color. This time I'm putting the pigment down and then, drawing it out with that damp brush and just kind of blending it into what's already there until I'm, happy with it. I can always keep going back and add more. The same thing with the outside of the flower, these fluted flowers. I'm going to go in, start adding in a little bit of detail, rinse off my brush, blot it, and then just kind of blend that in and smooth it a little bit. There are some areas where I was a little heavy with the pigment, but it's okay. Like, again, let it dry, or if you really are like, no, it's way too dark, blot it up with a clean paper towel, put some clean water on it, blot it again. You can remove a ton of pigment, and we're actually going to end up doing that a little bit later on in this piece, just because my pomegranate got a little bit too dark and I kind of lost my highlight and I wanted it back. So just some things that you can do to kind of help yourself on the process, but nothing is going to help more than practice. So, I do hope that you are trying these different techniques that we're doing, and not just watching, though if you enjoy watching, I appreciate that as well. But I hope that you're learning a little something and you're interested in giving it a try. So at this point, my pomegranate is dry. So now I'm going to go back in with my second layer and add more pigment. This time I'm not doing wet on wet. I'm going in with a wet pigment and dry paper. So I'm starting with my darkest where I want it to be the most shadowed areas, and then working out more towards the center. This is not something I have mastered yet. I'm not going to pretend like I have. And this is how my center ended up getting just a little bit too dark, is because I didn't leave enough room for there to be a highlight, because I was just adding this pigment. And so when I added the water in the center, it just kind of got a little bit crazy. And really was moving, because that's what watercolor is intended to do when it meets water. But also because, as you can just see there, I didn't leave it alone. Just leave it alone, Kelly. Leave it alone. I know it's hard. But so now everything's kind of running together and I really don't have a highlight. So I'm looking at it and seeing what it is that I can do to kind of bridge that gap. I added a little bit more of the reddish color that I blended, and I still didn't really love it. So I'm going to go back in. I added a little bit more pigment, and again, I'm like, no, this is not it. I need to back up off of it. So I added some more yellow because here I'm still trying to learn my lesson, and now I'm just going in with some clean water to see if I can kind of move it around enough that I will like it. And the answer to that is no. I could not move it around because I just had too much going on. So I'm going to let it dry, and I moved on to the other flowers while I figured out what it is that I wanted to do to kind of salvage that piece. Once it's dry, it's not as bad as it was when it was wet, but it still doesn't have the highlight that I want it to have. And that happens, and it's okay. So here, just doing the same thing, going back, adding deeper color to the smaller flowers, and we'll come back to this pomegranate in just a little bit. So we've had really good weather here. Super, super excited that we've had good weather, which also makes the holiday crafting a little bit challenging for me, because it's like today, I think we had a high of like 60, which is like unheard of in Northeast Ohio. For this time of year, it's so nice. And it's just not really putting me in the holiday crafting mood. So super excited that I got something else to kind of play with. If you don't know, if you're not familiar with Gina K's Designs, she actually does an incentive set. So if you spend $75, you get a free stamp set. Some people actually collect them. Like they, every month or every release, they make sure that they, get the new incentive set. And they're really very pretty. You can always see what they are on the website before you decide if that's something that you're interested in. But, so tonight, I don't even know what the new incentive set is because it won't be revealed until tonight with the rest of the release. And I am doing this voiceover during the day. So we'll find out together later tonight. But that's just something to know if you happen to be a fan of her designs, that, she does try to give back and give a little extra something. She also does lives all the time. And just constantly teaching and doing different classes and stuff. So here is where I'm going to go back in and try to fix my highlight. I put down clean water where I wanted it to be the lightest, and then I went in with my paper towel and blotted it. You can do this as many times as you need to. So it will also remove more pigment the longer you let the water sit. So I was happy that I was getting my highlight back. I took out a little bit too much. So around the edge, I added just a bit more of that magenta. And I'm going to go back in with that damp brush and just go around the edge. I found myself getting a little bit of a hard edge, which was my own doing because, I'm just trying to play with this one section of the pomegranate. So when I was unhappy with the hard edges I was getting in the center, not so much the edges, like on the edges, I wanted it to be clean and have some hard edges. But once I wasn't really happy with what was going on in the center, I just used a damp brush and a little bit of water and just kind of went over everything very lightly so that I could get all of the pigments moving and just smooth out those hard lines. And that worked well for me. Then that's pretty much done. The pomegranate's done. I'm going to go in and do the center of the smaller flowers. I did yellow and gold. And then I'm going to use the permanent brown to add the dots back into the center of the flowers for the stamen. And this was a little bit, because my paper was dry, the dots were a little bit harsh. So I went in with a clean damp section of my paper towel, and I just did a real quick blot over top of it. And that kind of helped some of them smooth out and not be so, in your face. Now that the flowers are done, I'm sorry, I did forget about the base of the flower, where it's the actual fluted portion. And in order to do those, I started with a little bit of green at the base. I used my yellow as a buffer color between my green and my pink, so I added just a little bit of yellow and then went in with this reddish pink color at the very top where it would be, growing out from the stem into the flower, and I'm going to let those dry, and then I'll add more detail to those later after they're dry. Moving on to the leaves, again, going to be doing some wet on wet. I wet the entire leaf. These two are connected, so I don't care if they blend into each other. I'm fine with the pigment running however it does. I'm not as specific with my leaves because I feel like it's easy to identify them as a leaf with or without any detail. So I'm dropping in my sap green, and then because I like a lot of color variation, you don't have to do this. If you don't, but I do. So I'm adding in some teal, and you can add in, again, as much or as little as you like. For a wet on wet technique, the water is going to do most of the blending. So it's really very easy to get a good blend. Here I remember I told you I stamped them a little bit far apart knowing I'd be able to connect them. So I did have to add a little bit of a longer branch or stem on these particular leaves to get them to be together. And this time I did it with the teal instead of the green. And instead of, doing the green and then adding the teal, I will just do the teal and then add the green until I'm happy with how they're looking. So we're having this beautiful weather, and it's really making it challenging to want to do the holiday things. I'm on the struggle bus with that. And I think I'm probably not the only person. I mean, you hear people all the time talk about, how with retail and stuff, like Christmas gets earlier and earlier every year. You're looking at Halloween stuff and fall stuff in the middle of July. But I think that's probably because we as consumers feel like there's, we buy something like decor for your house or a stamp set, like we buy it and we have such a limited time to use it, that it's almost not even worth buying it. But if you get it a little earlier, it gives you a longer time to use it. I just, I like the things that I have, and I have a couple of good, holiday stamp sets that I go back to time and time again. In fact, the last Gina K card I made with the poinsettias, which I did in Copics, but I can link it at the end of the video. The snowflake stencil that I used in the background, I've had for years. It's the Stellar Snowflake. I love it. It's beautiful. And it's still pretty. Like, nothing's changed just because it's a little bit older, so I still use it. So don't feel like, you can't use the stuff that you have. So there I was just adding the detail back to the edge of the flowers. And then you've noticed that I have sped this up. Just because this video is a little bit longer, and the leaves is the same process. I just sped it up so you would still be able to see the creation of the whole piece without missing anything. We just wouldn't have to sit here for, hours upon hours watching me paint leaves over and over again. I do have some regrets that I didn't add more detail to the leaves. Like, I could have gone in and added some veins and things like that. I didn't. I could have. In the future, I will probably make sure that I do. But yeah, all in all, pretty happy with how this one came out. I know I told you in the beginning the sizes I was using. For the pomegranate, that's really the only place I use the number 8. The rest of everything else I use the number 2. And it's just, again, because when I'm doing a more controlled watercolor like this, I like a smaller brush. Now, if you want to, I've heard like fine artists say that the more comfortable you can get with a larger brush, the easier it'll be for you to paint on bigger pieces. But my intention is never to paint a big piece, so I'm fine with a number 2. So at this point, everything is done. I am going to go in and do some splatters. I know that's not everybody's aesthetic, which is totally fine. Skip that part. But I think it adds a little whimsy to it, and I like that. So I only did the spatters in magenta and in the teal. And again, just a very fine mist. I didn't go too crazy. Just a little something. And then I waited for that to dry before I trimmed it down. My piece was cut at, I think, 5 by 6, I think is what it was. And I just cut it to be an A2 size card, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And it was still plenty big enough to house all of my things. I think I lost the tip of one leaf when I trimmed it down, but that was about it. For the sentiment, I decided I was just going to stamp it directly on the paper. This is scary for some people, but I didn't want a big, bulky sentiment on cardstock that was going to cover up all of my painting. So I opted to just stamp it right on top. I tried it first in a navy, but it didn't show up enough. I didn't like it enough. So after I tried the navy and that didn't work out, I just switched over to Gina K's Jet Black Amalgam ink, and I stamped it in that, and that worked just fine. I think it is maybe a little hard to read on screen, but in real life it is very much legible. So no regrets on the sentiment. But yeah, so I mean, that's pretty much the whole process. I think we just talked about the weather. There wasn't even really any story time today, just because. Oh, I guess maybe the holiday portion. That I'm a little bit bogged down with the holidays, but I do appreciate when something like this comes out and I can take a little break. So that is it. That's the whole card. I hope you'll check out Gina's whole release. I will link that below as well. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.